So we saw in the previous example of solving linear regression for this particular expression. We use what is the cost function or the objective function we use for regression analysis. What is it called? Anyone remember? The objective function for regression analysis. What are we trying to minimize here?
Loss cost. Loss
What is
function.
what is the name of that function?
Mean square error.
Mean square error. Good. So we are trying to minimize the mean square error. So this is what we are trying to do, and we said that for this particular mean square error, there is a advantage that there is a closed form solution, which is this normal equation, which gives us straight away the best model parameters. But there is a catch here. This closed form solution is not feasible in all scenarios. So there are situations where you cannot actually use the closed form solution to find the best theta parameters. And now we can ask under what situation it is not possible to use this. So when we look at this particular normal equation, we see two things. So there is a matrix multiplication happening here, these dot products. So that is essentially a matrix multiplication. And then there is also a matrix inversion happening here, because all these x and y, they are essentially the matrix. And these are matrix operations that is happening. So matrix multiplication or matrix inversion is a computationally complex, the computational complexity is high when you want to apply matrix multiplication or matrix inversion. So if your training data is humongously large in terms of sample size or in terms of features, then this closed form solution is not feasible because the computational complexity is high and there won't be enough memory to store the entire intermediate values to perform these matrix inversions. So the computational complexity for matrix inversion and matrix multiplication is exactly the same, and they vary something in the range of a highly optimized matrix inversion can be achieved in big O of n power 2.4, but their trivial implementation will be big O of n cube. So it's more than quadratic runtime. So anything quadratic with large number of size itself is horrible. And now if we think about above more than quadratic, something close to cube, then if the x is large, then this operation is not practically feasible. So that practical infeasible scenario arises when you have either a huge number of features that you're dealing with, or you will have a huge number of training data set that you're dealing with. At least this training data situation can be addressed using limiting certain samples, but the number of features that you have to use is anyway hugely dependent. So there can be scenarios like this where you cannot actually practically make use of normal equation. And now the question is, if it cannot be used, then how do we even find the best theta parameters? So that is the place where the gradient descent technique comes to rescue us. So using gradient descent technique, it doesn't matter how big our training data matrix is, like so many training samples or so many features, you don't have to perform any matrix inverse operation in gradient descent. And that is a huge advantage. And you can get comparable results, comparable original results using gradient descent as well. So that is one of the important significance of gradient descent in machine learning. So you can find the best optimal parameters in a more computationally feasible approach, and that also leads to best solutions. So that is one important thing. So coming to these squared error that I was mentioning here. So in the previous session, I mentioned about convex property. So why do we need to go for squared errors? Because the squared error function gives us some property called convexity, which is very helpful when we employ gradient descent as the optimization strategy. So that is one important aspect of looking at mean squared error. Secondly, this square ensures that we have a unique solution when you look at this mean squared error. So this expression also ensures there is a unique solution which minimizes this. So these are a couple of other important facts. And as one of the previous participant was asking where we can read more about this. So these points are also mentioned in the Introduction to Statistical Learning textbook. So you can read it. It's one of the excellent book which gives a lot of insights about the concept behind machine learning. So now, when you wanted to understand about gradient descent, there are a few mathematical preliminaries that we needed to follow up. So we need to understand about derivatives. So let's try to brush up what is the derivative function, derivative of a function. So let's try a function like y is equal to f of x. So this is a univariate function here because this function f takes only one argument. So it's a univariate function. The first derivative, we can either write it as f prime of x or we can write it as dy by dx. So these are different representations for derivative. And now the question is, what does this f prime of x or dy by dx captures? What does it captures? So when we think in that terms, how do we interpret dy by dx is like this. When you make a small change to x, what kind of a change you can expect in y. So that relationship is captured by dy by dx. So that's what the first derivative captures. So it captures the rate at which y changes with respect to x. So the other way of understanding is when you make a small change to x, what kind of a change happens to y. Even when you see y is independent variable, x is dependent variable. And dy by dx is also sort of capturing a relationship between dependent and this independent and dependent variable, something very much close to regression, but it is not exactly regression, but I'm just saying a similarity that you can intuitively look at. So if we make a small change to x, what change happens to y? How can we make use of such information? Or what kind of properties that we can derive out of it? So let us say you have a function y, which looks like something sort of a sinusoidal curve. And we are saying at this particular point, we want to find the first derivative of this function. For this particular function, for this point, for every point, we can find a first derivative. So let us look at this particular point here. So we want to find the derivative of this function at this point. So mathematically, how we derive is we take a tangent for that point, and the slope of that tangent essentially describes the derivative of that particular point for this curve. So this is the mathematical part from calculus. So now we need to understand a couple of concepts in this particular context. What do you mean by a negative slope and what do you mean by a positive slope? So the slope that we define, so there can be a negative slope, a positive slope, or a zero slope, so that is possible. By negative slope, what kind of understanding we should get? For a function, if we get a negative slope, what are we supposed to understand? So this is the x-axis and this is the y-axis. By negative slope, what it means is that from this point, if you increase x, y will decrease. That is what the negative slope implies. So if you increase x, y will decrease. If you decrease x, y will increase. So that is what we should understand by negative slope. Equivalently, if you think about positive slope, if you increase x, y will increase. If you decrease x, y will decrease. So this is what we mean by positive slope. So these two concepts are very important. What do you mean by a negative slope and what do you mean by a positive slope? So in a negative slope, if you increase x, y will decrease. So that is one important point to keep in mind. Then the other thing also, it is easier to remember. So now there is another useful result. So with the derivative information, you can also make predictions in smaller neighborhood as well. That is very much similar to what we captured for regression analysis, where we have the relationship between dependent and independent variables. So if you know the relationship, we can make predictions, but using the derivative of a function, we can make predictions to a reasonable accuracy in the small neighborhood. So if you know f of x, then you can predict what will be the value at f of x plus epsilon. This epsilon is a small neighborhood. So if you know f of x, and if you know the first derivative f prime of x, then f of x plus epsilon can be predicted. This is in a small neighborhood. So this is a result from mathematics. So if you have first derivative, if you also know the second derivative, third derivative, or higher order derivative informations, you can keep adding it here. Then your prediction will be much accurate. So these kind of derivative information helps in predicting the local neighborhood as well. So if you keep on adding higher order derivatives, then there is a specific name to that particular series. It is called Taylor series. So, but here it is a
Taylor
restricted
series.
version. Yeah, so here it is a restricted version. We limit it only to the first order derivative. So this is one thing I wanted to mention for about some intuitions behind derivatives. And now let us get into convexity. So previously also I mentioned that squared function is a convex function. So convex function usually looks like this, a smooth curve. But we need to define a property for convexity. So many curves can look smooth, but that is not the point. So there should be a property that uniquely identifies a curve as a convex curve or as a convex surface. So we call curve in 2 dimensions. In higher dimensions, we call it as a surface. Like in 2 dimensions, we call it as a straight line for linear geometry. But in higher dimensions, we call it hyperplane. Likewise, in 2D, we call it curve. In higher dimensions, we call it surface. So it can be a convex curve or a convex surface. So we need to define property of convexity. So now the question is, how do we define the property of convexity? So the property is like this. For this curve, you randomly pick 2 points on the curve. So let's say these are the 2 points. And now you connect a straight line between them. This straight line is not intersecting this curve. So that is fine. Take another random 2 points, connect a straight line between them. It will not intersect and come out of this curve. Take another random pair, connect a straight line between them. It will not intersect the curve. For any pairs of points that you take on this curve and you connect a straight line between them, if it doesn't intersect and come out through the curve, then we call this curve as a convex curve. So that is how we define the property. Say, for example, we take a curve like this, and we are asking whether this is a convex surface or not, or a convex curve or not. So now what we need to do, let's take randomly 2 points on the curve. And now you connect a straight line between them. See, now it is intersecting this curve. So that means this is not a convex curve. So this is how we define convexity. So this is non-convex. So we have convex as well as non-convex curves or surfaces. So in higher dimensions, we refer to that as surfaces. So we have convex and non-convex surfaces. So this is one important thing to keep in mind. So when you enter into deep learning domain, you usually encounter these non-convex error surface, which you need to optimize. And that is the reason why the results of deep learning experiments are not perfectly reproducible. So every time you run, you get slight difference in the result that you are running. That is because the error surface is highly non-convex when you are dealing with deep learning. But most of the other classical machine learning techniques, you are dealing with somewhat a convex optimization like this. So you can find the best theta parameters and it is more or less reproducible. Now, so that is all about convex and non-convexity intuitions that we should understand. So now the entire optimization point of view. Let us take a function f of x, which is defined as half x square. And this is a quadratic function. And if for various values of x, if you plot a graph, it looks like this. And this is also obviously it is a convex curve. And the squared quadratic functions always looks like convex. And now the question we are posing is, for what value of x this function f of x attains the minimum value? Because for several values of x, this will evaluate to a scalar value. So for what value of x this attains the minimum value? So that is the question. And you can actually do it by, try to do it by hand, solve it by hand, put various values of x and evaluate f of x, tabulate it, and then see for what value of x this was minimum. Then here you can see for when x is 0, this value is 0, f of x is 0, but otherwise it is all increasing. But this is not, since this is a simple function, we could do this, but it's not feasible for all types of complex functions. So this is not the best way. Then we ask, is there any mathematical way to find for what value of x this function attains the minimum value? So the mathematical procedure is, you take the first derivative of this function. So take f prime of x. So that will evaluate as x because it is half times 2x. So 2 and 2 will cancel out. So you have x. So this is the first derivative. And now for what value of x the first derivative becomes 0. So there is some value of x, the first derivative becomes 0. That is the value which minimizes the original function. So this is the mathematics behind that optimization problem. So for what value of x this f of x is minimized, for that we need to take the first derivative and solve for x. For what value of x the first derivative is 0. That is the value which minimizes f of x. So this is an important result to keep in mind. So now the f prime of x, for what value of x f prime of x becomes 0. So that is also not very easy thing to solve. You can either again try to tabulate and find out for what value of x f prime of x is becoming 0, but that manual approach is also not feasible. Then what is the best way to find for what value of x f prime of x is approaching to 0? Here it is a standard thing, like the first, when you think in terms of first derivative, we are looking for what value of x the first derivative is approaching 0. So if we reach 0 or close to 0, we are sure that we are close to the solution. So that is the essential idea of taking the first derivative based solution. But again, here tabulating is not feasible. Then what can we do? So there is a well-defined procedure to find for what value of x the first derivative will become 0 or close to 0. And by the way, this is an example that I have taken from the deep learning textbook, the standard deep learning textbook written by Ian Goodfellow and Joshua Bengio that I was showing previously. So you can also refer to the part 1 of that textbook is also excellently well written, which covers all the fundamentals, intuitions of machine learning. Okay, so now what is the best way to find for what value of x f prime of x is 0 or close to 0? So the well-defined procedure is you randomly pick a value of x. We don't know for what value it is, but what we can start with is we randomly pick a value and then put it in the first derivative and see what it is evaluating to. So let us say our first, we randomly pick minus 1.5. And let's put minus 1.5 in this first expression, first derivative expression. So f prime of minus 1.5, the output will be minus 1.5. So here, what we are getting is a negative derivative. So it is a negative slope. The first derivative, you can interpret it as slope. So we are getting a negative slope as compared to what we discussed previously. So for a given point, if we have a negative slope, what does it mean? If you increase x, the output will decrease. So our target is for what value of x, the output will be at the minimum. So if the derivative is negative, so if you increase x, we will further reduce. So our target is to reach here, but we randomly started at this place. We look at the derivative sign. If it is negative, let us increase x a little bit. So let us say we make a baby step of 0.5. So we will make an increment. So minus 1.5 plus 0.5. So it will be minus 1. Now you are checking whether this minimizes the first derivative. You take and put it in this particular function. F prime of minus 1 is output is minus 1. That is again a negative derivative. That means it's a negative slope. So it means you again have to increase x a little bit so that you can further reduce your output. So you will again make a step. So you will reach to minus 0.5. You are again asking whether this minimizes it. You again put it in your first derivative. It is f prime of minus 0.5. The output is minus 0.5 because f prime of x is equal to x. It is again a negative slope. So you can again increase it. So now you again increased it, so x became 0. So now you again put it inside your first derivative. F prime of 0 is equal to 0. So now that's the point, because for when x is 0, f prime also became 0. So that gives us the indication that when the value of x is 0, your original function attains the minimum value. So this is the idea, how you can find for what value of x your original function attains the minimum value by making use of the sign of the derivative of your original function. We can start from a random point and then systematically navigate towards the minimal point. And this procedure is referred to as gradient descent. And where is it used? So if you assume f of x as your mean squared error function, and you wanted to solve for best theta parameters, and you expect that the mean square error becomes minimum, then you can take the first derivative of your mean square error for various values of theta. You see for what combinations of theta value the first derivative is becoming 0, and that is the best model parameters that you can end up with. So that is how you compare gradient descent with the model estimation, or that is the optimization part. Say for example, you randomly picked a point and it happened to be a positive slope. If it was 1.0, then it would give a positive slope. So if it is a positive slope, so if you decrease x, your output will decrease. A positive slope means if you increase x, output will increase. If you decrease x, output will decrease. So here if you have a positive slope, you keep on decreasing and you keep on decreasing until your first derivative becomes 0 and you hit the optimal value, which minimizes your original function. And this procedure is referred to as the gradient descent. So that is just summarized using this mathematical notation. But what is important is to understand the working principle and intuition. And you can pick up this equation anytime you want. So that is the essential idea. And this is the core of finding the best model parameter which minimizes the error function using the first derivative approach. We were using a term called gradient. So how does the gradient different from the derivative concepts? Is there any difference? So that's what we need to think. So far, these all are, we are dealing with first order differential. That is an important factor. Remember, this is a first order differential. This function f of x, this is a univariate function, because in this function you only have one independent variable, or equivalently you can say this is a function which is taking one argument. This is a univariate function, and the first order differential of a univariate function is usually referred to as the derivative. You can also have multivariate function where a function takes multiple arguments like x1, x2, x3. The first order differential of a multivariate function is referred to as gradient. So this is the important difference between derivative and gradient. Both are first order differential, but what kind of function do you apply it? So we call it with different name. So if you are dealing with a multivariate function, its first order differential is referred to as gradient. And if you have multiple attributes or inputs, so this you can think of it like this is a function which will predict the height of a participant by looking at the weight, age, and gender information. So it's as simple as that. So you can quickly relate it with that. So if you wanted to find the derivative of this function, since you have multiple independent variables, how do we find the derivative? So in this scenario, we bring in a concept called partial derivatives. So we will first find, okay, how does this function output changes when you keep x2 and x3 constant but only change x1. And we again need to analyze, you keep x1 and x3 constant, how does the output of this function changes when you apply a small change to x2. So likewise, you extend this logic, you keep others constant and try to change one of that and see how the output varies. And you group them all together, so that is called the gradient. So you have to bring in partial derivatives, and partial derivatives is represented using this dou symbol. So this is obtaining the partial derivative of this function with respect to x1. That means you keep x2 and x3 constant, apply a small change to x1 and see how this output of function influences it. This is the partial derivative of the function with respect to x2. So you keep x1 and x3 constant, apply a small change to x2 and see how the function's output changes. Likewise, keep x1 and x2 constant, apply a small change to x3 and see how it changes. You group them together, you put it inside a matrix, and this collection of these partial derivatives is referred to as gradients, because these are the first order differential of a multivariate function. Another important thing to also keep in mind is that this is a function which gives only one value as output. Even though it is taking multiple input, it will only give one value as output. So multi-input, single output function. This is a multivariate function. And this is the symbol that is usually used to represent gradient of a function. So the first order differential of a multivariate function with only one output. And this symbol is a Greek symbol called nabla. So we refer to that as nabla f. This is how we represent gradient. And this gradient helps us in navigating towards the minimal point. If you have a convex surface, using this gradient information, by applying the gradient descent technique, you can actually navigate towards the minimal point. So this is the idea. You can also have a multivariate function which takes multiple inputs and also gives multiple outputs, and such kind of generalized multivariate functions are also there. Function which take multiple inputs and also gives multiple outputs. That means it gives a vector of values as output. Let us call it a generalized multivariate function which takes multiple input and gives multiple output. We have to apply first order differential to such a function as well, which takes multiple input and give multiple output. And first order differential of a generalized multivariate function is called Jacobian. So this is a function which takes multiple inputs. Say for example, it takes n inputs and it gives m outputs. So these are m output values. So output is a vector of value. So if you wanted to take first order differential of such a generalized multivariate function, which takes n inputs and give m outputs, we have to apply partial derivative on every individual outputs you get. So you find the partial derivative of x1, x2, x3 with respect to this output f1, and then you find x1, x2, x3 partial derivative with respect to f2 and so forth, and put it inside a matrix. This is called Jacobian matrix. So this is also capturing first order differential information, and this also helps us to navigate towards the minimum value. So this is called Jacobian. Gradient is nothing but a special case of Jacobian, where you only have one output, multiple input, only one output, it is gradient. But multiple input, multiple output, the first order differential matrix is referred to as Jacobian. So the derivative, gradient, Jacobian, they all are first order differential information. We can also do one more derivative on the first order differential, and so we will end up with second order derivative. So if you take a multivariate function, you apply second order derivative to a function, then that matrix is called Hessian matrix. So Hessian is nothing but the second order derivative of a multivariate function. So this is the first order derivative of the gradient, which is this nabla f. And say, for example, you apply one more derivative on this, you will end up with second order differential. And this is called Hessian matrix. So gradient and Jacobian has a significance. It says that in which direction you should move so that you can reach the minimum, because first order differential gives us that sign information, like is it negative slope or a positive slope, based on which we can decide whether we have to move towards the right side or left side and so forth to reach to the minimum point. So now what does Hessian information convey? So what is the intuition? Say, for example, when you think in terms of that physics, space-time relationship. So the rate of change of distance with respect to time, what do we call that? Rate of change of distance with respect to time?
Acceleration. So first derivative velocity and second is acceleration.
Yeah, so the first derivative is the rate of change of distance with respect to time. So that is
Change
the
of
velocity.
distance. Yeah, so that's velocity. Yeah.
Yeah, and then if you take the rate of change of velocity, we get the acceleration. So that is essentially the second derivative of the distance with respect to time. So that gives us the physical information, how fast an object is moving and in which direction it is moving, we get the velocity. And we also get how it is accelerating, whether the speed is keeping on increasing or whether the speed is decreasing and so forth. So from the second order derivative, we get that acceleration information as well. So that is very obvious. But when you come to this particular machine learning scenario, what does the first order derivative and second order derivative of these functions convey? So the first order derivative, we said, it is a collection of first order derivatives like gradient or Jacobian. It tells us in which direction you should move so that you reach to the minimum point. You start at some random place, the Jacobian or gradient tells us in which direction you should move so that you reach to the minimum point. And now the question is, then what does Hessian information conveys? What does second order information conveys? So geometrically, the second order Hessian matrix tells us the curvature of the surface. So how curved the surface is at a given point. That is what the Hessian information conveys, the second order. So if the curvature is small, that means we are nowhere near the minimum point. But if the curvature is becoming high, it means we are reaching towards the minimum point, especially in a convex surface. The Hessian information or the curvature information gives us this additional detail about the curvature of the surface. Are we near to the minimum or not? We can infer from the Hessian matrix. So in a gradient descent approach, this Hessian matrix helps us when the curvature is small, we can take larger jumps, and when the curvature is small, take smaller jumps so that we reach to the optimal point. So that is what the insight behind Jacobian and Hessian information. That means the first order and second order information. So Hessian is a very important and useful information in terms of mathematical optimization. But there is a catch. Mathematically, it is good, but when you wanted to practically implement it, maintaining Hessian matrix is computationally intense, especially the memory or the space complexity of handling Hessian matrix is extremely huge. And there is also time complexity associated with that. So it is very difficult, and many times it is practically not feasible to estimate Hessian matrix and then solve for the best solution. So it is an unfortunate situation for machine learning researchers that we cannot make use of Hessian matrix robustly in all types of machine learning problems. Even when it comes to deep learning, if we had this Hessian information, it would have been excellent to find optimal solutions. But there is a workaround for that. Instead of straight away estimating the Hessian matrix, what we do is that we do some sort of approximations to Hessian. So that is, it somewhat gives an approximation of the curvature information, which helps us for faster convergence towards the best solution. In classical machine learning, we refer to that as solvers. In deep learning, we refer to them as optimizers. So say, for example, there is a solver called LBFGS. So what it is trying to do, it is trying to find best solution by approximating the Hessian matrix numerically, and helps us towards faster convergence. In deep learning, for example, if you're already familiar with, you will be using some optimizers called ADAM, adaptive momentum. What it is trying to do, it is trying to do some sort of approximation to the Hessian, so it helps in faster convergence. It helps in making large moves in certain regions and smaller moves in other regions. So that is on approximations, and there are a lot of research works in terms of optimizations as well. So this is a side note that I wanted to mention. So two things to keep in mind about Jacobian and Hessian. Jacobian is a first order derivative, gives us the information in which direction you should move so that you reach to the optimal solution. Hessian is sort of it's a second order matrix which captures the curvature information, which helps us in the faster convergence of the solution. And practical limitations are there, so we go for approximations, and they are referred to as solvers or optimizers in the machine learning terminology. So now the gradient descent is this. So you start at some random point. So you have these Jacobian. So many a times you would see the cost function or the objective function will be referred with this generic term J of theta. So this J stands for Jacobian. That means based on the first order derivative, we are optimizing and finding the best solution. That's what this J of theta stands for. So this will do this. So the gradient descent update is captured in mathematical equation like this. So theta is the parameter that we wanted to find. So the theta gets updated based on the previous values of theta, and the update is defined by this particular place. So this is the gradient information, the first order information. And this eta essentially tells how much you should move. So this is something called learning rate. And this is the gradient descent update rule. So let me just explain in detail. So this is theta next. So this is the updated theta is based on the previous theta minus this is the update that is going to happen to the values here. So initially, so this theta means all your model parameters, theta 0, theta 1, theta 2 up to theta n. That is the theta. And this is nothing but your mean squared error's partial derivative. So that is the gradient. So this nabla of mean squared error function, because this is what you are trying to minimize. So based on which you would update the theta values. So if you keep finding these derivative informations, if corresponding to theta 0, if the derivative information is negative, then you would increase theta 0 a little bit. If the derivative sign is positive, you would decrease a little bit, because if it is positive, positive times this minus is positive, negative anyway, so you will decrease it. If the derivative is negative, negative times negative becomes positive, so you will increase a little bit. So that little bit thing is defined by these factor eta, which we refer to as learning rate, and these are the gradient information, whether it says whether it is negative or positive gradient, which eventually decides whether you need to update it by increasing or decreasing the value. So that is a very simple and intuitive concept, but very efficient. So by looking at that derivatives, you keep on updating, and eventually you will reach to the optimal solution. So this is how we apply gradient descent. So you see here, there is no concept of applying matrix multiplication or matrix inversion and so forth. So it is very optimal, and you can even work with a humongous amount of training data set. It doesn't matter. So that's what I have summarized it. You can read it later. So if you have a convex function, then it is very easy. You start at some random point, and you have a well-defined procedure and keep on navigating it until your first derivative becomes 0 or very much close to 0. So you would assume that as the optimal solution. If it is non-convex, then you have some challenges. Maybe in a non-convex function, this is the global minimum, but there are chances that you will get stuck at these sort of local minimum. Or even at some places, it might look like a plateau where the derivative becomes 0, so you cannot make any updates. So that kind of scenario arises. So this is the reason why we always prefer our cost function to be convex, so that you can reach to global optimal solutions. But if you have non-convex surfaces, that is challenging. And this is a big headache when you come to enter into deep learning. And there was a very innovative idea introduced in deep learning, which is called residual networks. So these residual networks significantly helps in removing these non-convexity and helps to approximate convexity in the error surface. So if you see, for example, state-of-the-art deep learning models, everything will make use of some sort of residual connections in the network. So I'm just saying as a side note that non-convexity in deep learning can be addressed using residual connections. So there is a mathematical result for that. And another important thing called feature scaling is relevant in terms of machine learning practice. So there are two types of feature scaling concepts. One is called min-max normalization. The other is called standardization. So what are we trying to achieve using feature scaling? The intuition is this. Say, for example, you have 3 attributes, or you are looking at 3 features for your specific problem. Let us call it x1, x2, and x3. These are 3 features. Let's say the values of x1 ranges something like 1 lakh to 1 million. So let us say the range of values of x1 is from 1 lakh to 1 million. x2, when you look at the range of x2, it is between 0 to 100. All the values of x2 will be between 0 to 100. But x1, it will be between 1 lakh and 10 lakh. Then the value range I'm saying for every attribute. And if we take x3, let us say its range of values between -10 to -20. So if you look at the range of values for every attribute, x1, x2, and x3, they vary too much. x1 is in lakhs, x2 is between 0 to 100, x3 is negative. So that gives us a challenging scenario when you apply gradient descent to solve for optimal solution. It will not quickly help us lead to optimal solution. Then what is the workaround? No matter what the original range of values for the attributes be, we have to somehow apply some scaling and bring it to similar range of values. And that is what exactly feature scaling do. So if we can bring them to similar range of values, preserving some properties, that helps us in finding the best optimal parameters. So that is the significance of feature scaling. So there are 2 types, min-max normalization and standardization. In min-max normalization, what it does is that it will find what is the minimum and maximum value of x1, x2, or x3, and then it will apply this equation, x minus x min divided by x max minus x min. So what it will do is that it will force, no matter what, x1 is between 1 lakh to 1 million, it will scale it down to 0 to 1. The range will be between 0 to 1. Why it will be 0? At some point the value of x will be x min, so it will be 0 divided by whatever it is 0. At some point the x is going to be x max, so x max minus numerator and denominator will be same, it will be 1. So that justifies the range of values is between 0 to 1. So min max normalization always brings the attributes values to the range 0 to 1. So now you have it in a similar range. Standardization is another technique that is used for feature scaling, and this is the most prominently used approach. If you use the standard scaling, what it does is that it will find the mean and standard deviation of the attributes, and then you apply this x minus mu by standard deviation. So if you apply this, it will again push all the attributes to a unit normal distribution. So that's what this will do. So no matter what the distribution of your individual attributes is, the range of values, it is trying to push it to some unit normal distribution. So it will be something with mean 0 and standard deviation 1. So it will be within that range. So it will apply that standardization scaling. And it has been found that this standardization is the best way of performing feature scaling. So you push all your attributes to a unit normal distribution, and then you train your model. So that helps in faster or better convergence of model theta parameter estimation. This min-max normalization sometimes helps, may not help at some time. So it depends. So you need to experiment and see. But predominantly, as a rule, you can always try standardization. So this preserves the original structure of your data, but this introduces skewness. It disturbs the structure of the data. So here you are estimating the standard deviation. What does the standard deviation information tells us? If you have a cloud of points like this, what does standard deviation do? It will find the centroid, and then it averages the distance of all the points to its centroid or to its mean. So it will estimate the distance, find the distance, average it. Here also find the distance and average it. So that is called standard deviation. So if the standard deviation value is small, it means all the data are dense or close to its mean. If the standard deviation value is high, that means the average distance is high, it means these points are spread apart or farther away from the centroid or the average point. So this sort of tells us or captures the structure of the data. And when we are applying the standardization based scaling, it helps because it takes into account about the structure of the data, so it preserves the useful information. It doesn't introduce skewness. One analogy that you can think is, if you have an image like this, if you think about no matter what the range, bring everything into 0 to 1, it is like you are not giving importance to the aspect ratio, but forcing the width and height to be a specific range. Say, for example, if you try to put it within width and 200, height as 200, then it introduces skewness. But if you try to retain the aspect ratio and resize it, like height is 200, then the width has to retain the aspect ratio, then it rescales but preserves the original structure. So this is something very much similar to what min-max normalization and standardization do. So this can introduce skewness and introduce some biases or some issues with your data scaling. So now to summarize about the different types of gradient descent. So you have to take the derivative, the first derivative of your error function with respect to different parameters, model parameters that you wanted to optimize. So these are the partial derivatives that you are doing. So we will update it with this learning rate. So how many training samples do you use to update your theta? So that helps in distinguishing different types of gradient descent. If you accumulate the error of your entire training sample before you update your theta, then that is called batch gradient descent. Sometimes it is referred to as full batch gradient descent. If you use only one training sample, if you look at the error of one training sample and you immediately update the theta, then it is referred to as stochastic gradient descent. These are two extremes. To make a baby step towards the optimal solution, you will wait for the error, this gradient error of all your training samples. If you have 10,000 training samples, you will wait and accumulate all the 10,000 training samples error, you average them, and then you will update the theta. So it is a very slow process, but that is the best approach. So that is called batch gradient descent, or sometimes referred to as full batch gradient descent. Based on one training sample's error, we can update the theta, and that is called stochastic gradient descent. This stochastic term comes with the fact that out of your 10,000 training samples, you randomly pick a training sample, look at the error, and update the theta. So that randomly picking the sample is referred to as this stochasticity in updating the theta value for gradient descent. These are two different extremes. You have to wait for the entire training sample to finish. Here, immediately after each training sample, you are updating. This is slow, this is very fast, but there is a trade-off. Here it takes a lot of time, here the convergence is slow. Even though the update is fast, the convergence is slow. So we need to come up with an intermediate representation where we explicitly define a small number of training samples. Say for example, after accumulating 16 training samples error, I will update theta. So if we do that, then it is called mini batch gradient descent. So these are the three types of gradient descent based on how you update your theta. So if you wait to accumulate all the training sample errors and then make a step, it is called full batch gradient descent, or you can simply call it batch gradient descent. And randomly pick a sample and update the theta, it is called stochastic gradient descent. An intermediate representation is the mini batch gradient descent. And you'll see that when you enter into deep learning based training, we will quite often use mini batch gradient descent. But in statistical machine learning, we might sometimes, if we are not dealing with a humongous amount of samples, you can go for batch gradient descent, or you will go for mini batch gradient descent. Sometimes stochastic gradient descent is also used. So it is all left to the researchers what kind of gradient descent update you wanted to do. So just to summarize, the batch gradient descent, when it wanted to find the optimal solution, the path it chooses to reach the optimal solution is very smooth. But when you look at stochastic gradient descent, the optimization, trying to reach to the optimal solution is very noisy, because immediately after looking at the error of one training sample, you are updating the theta. So that doesn't give us a collective information about how your training sample actually looks like. It is not trying, it cannot quickly capture the distribution of your training sample. So you see a lot of randomness before it settles down to a close enough solution. When you look at the mini batch gradient descent, so you define what is the number of samples that you wanted to accumulate. You can define like 16 samples or 32 samples. So it is left to us. There is no, it is not mandatory that it has to be power of 2, but you can decide, and we can solve for the best theta parameter. And when you are using stochastic gradient descent or mini batch gradient descent, the update of theta is not based on the support of all training samples. So to control this randomness, what researchers have introduced is a strategy. So we are anyway using a concept called learning rate previously. So we are using this learning rate. So for stochastic gradient descent and mini batch gradient descent, there is an explicit control on the learning rate. So we start with a large learning rate, and then as we progress, we gradually decrease the learning rate. That means initially you take large jumps, and as you have accumulated more support, now you make smaller jumps. That is the intuition. So starting with a large learning rate, and then you gradually decrease with the hope of reaching to an optimal solution. So that technique is called simulated annealing. So simulated annealing is a general process where you start with a large value and then gradually decrease for the optimization. So here we apply simulated annealing to the learning rate, where you start with a large learning rate. So you make large jumps and then eventually reduce the learning rate so that you go towards the optimal solution. So these are the three types of gradient descent techniques that we should be familiar with.